Welcome to a special edition of the BMA podcast. This edition features the BMA social media manager, Dr. Gordon Fletcher, speaking at this year's annual representative meeting about what exactly social media is and should doctors be using it. And the BMA's Deputy Head of Ethics, Dr. Julian Sheether, talks about some of the issues you need to consider before using social media. And here's Dr. Fletcher.
Thank you very much. So, my name is Gordon Fletcher, and I'm the social media manager at the BMA. And what I want to talk to you about today is, unsurprisingly, social media. And I see we have in the audience some social media heroes over there. David Wrigley, Kailash Chand, very big on social media. I assume some people are big, some people come here, maybe not wanting to learn a bit more. So, social media is clearly very big. And it's not just very big amongst the general public, it's becoming very big for healthcare professionals. But I just want to talk about, for some people who may not know so much about social media, what exactly it is. So, there are three real features of any sort of social media. And that's that the content is shareable, it's user-generated content, so it's content from people that aren't kind of professionally publishing or on websites, it's ordinary individuals. And there's a community aspect to all social media. So when people tweet, or they're on Facebook, or they're using communities, like BMA communities, for example, they're tweeting within a community of people with similar interests to them. So, some examples of the sort of things that are social media, it can range from 140 characters, your typical tweet, it can be a blog, it could be an image, like is posted on networks like Instagram, but it can also be just data. I'm a runner myself, and I use an app called Runkeeper, and that posts the information from my runs to fellow runners, and it's a network, so you see how fast you go, and you relate to different people through running. So social media can be any sort of information, but it's information that can be shared, and it's community-based. So I just want to take you through some examples of some social media here. So we have the logos of Twitter and Facebook, the ubiquitous, huge networks that we have. We also have networks like Dr. Doc, which is the BMJ social media. We also have BMA Communities, which was launched earlier in the year, which I'll be talking about in a moment. Doctors.net UK, which is another type of doctors-only social media. And we also have things like Instagram, which are becoming very popular kind of image-sharing sites. And I think looking at how images are being used is the kind of next kind of step. Social media's been driven through words, images and video, things like YouTube, but also the sharing, how easy videos can be shared on things like Facebook is becoming a kind of a way in which people are starting to communicate. So also Wikipedia's up there, and often people don't think of Wikipedia as a kind of conventional social network, but Wikipedia is a way in which people can produce information collaboratively. So the wiki is just working on a document with a whole bunch of people, and I think it's something that is very useful if you think about the way in which people work at the moment. So quite often people work collaboratively on documents through things like list servers or emailing things around, and you have multiple different versions of it. So people are starting to use kind of wikis and things like that as a way of working together a bit more efficiently. So we've been through in the last 10 years a social media revolution. And, the term revolution, people may think, yeah, it's social media. But really, what's happened, when you think about it, is we've now all got the power in our pockets to publish things to the world. Yeah? In your pocket, there's a device that allows you to publish things globally so anyone can see them. That's a very powerful thing. If you think of, the dawn of the printing press, when the effort in terms of getting information out there, now we kind of all have that power. It's just dependent on what you say, how interesting it is, and how much it's shared, and what sort of community we're in. And I think it's a really powerful thing. I think if we'd have talked 20 years ago, if I was to sit there and say, yeah, you'll have a device in your pocket that can allow you to put stuff on the internet, you'd be like, yeah, get out of here. And now it's with us. And I think there's an interesting comparison with a mobile phone. Take this guy, the 19th president of the USA, Rutherford Hayes. And he has a really famous quote about the telephone. And he said about the telephone that it's an amazing invention, but who would ever want to use one? Yeah? And I'm sure some of you in the audience probably feel the same way about Twitter, perhaps, or at least did. I know when I first saw Twitter, I thought, really? What can you say in 140 characters? What's the point of that? And I think it's a really important thing about social media, and it's what today is about, is to have a moment where you kind of understand the point of social media, why it would be useful to you. And it's why we've got some of the guests here today to talk about ways in which they're using social media because in itself, the technology isn't that interesting. It's what you do with it, I think, that's really interesting. And what I want to do is take you through some ways in which I think people and doctors can use social media in a way that is useful. So some of the benefits to using social media. So I don't know if you're familiar with the case of Dr. Maryam Ibrahim. She's a doctor that was jailed in May for refusing to renounce her Christianity. She was 8 months pregnant at the time, and a month later she was made to give birth in shackles. And it's a shocking story. And we, as the BMA, we got involved in this. We wrote letters to the Sudanese government, we wrote to David Cameron telling him to raise this issue. But I think what's had the most power is the power of social media. So we've got involved with campaigns with Amnesty International and promoted the change.org petition. And this gives you a kind of a sweep of what people were trying to do online. So this is a very common thing that happens on social media, people promoting a hashtag, essentially showing their support for a campaign. And you can see some of the statistics here. So 95,000 people were liking this campaign on Facebook. That's 95,000 people supporting this doctor. There were 16,000 tweets with this Save Maryam hashtag, and nearly a million signatures on change.org. And I think the fantastic thing, because when I was writing this speech, it was all about encouraging people to get involved with this campaign as well. But the happy news came yesterday that actually Dr. Maryam Ibrahim has actually been released. And I think in part due to this kind of power of social media campaigning, continuing the pressure, because this stuff builds, the numbers go up and up. And it's something that I think is a really useful tool for doctors in terms of campaigning. So another way doctors can use social media, I think, is professional networking. So there will be a shameless plug here, I can't deny it, but the BMA has launched BMA Communities earlier this year. And for those of you who've attended the ARM, you may be aware of the fact that a lot of the debates that are happening at the ARM are also happening on BMA Communities. So a lot of people are talking about similar sort of issues. But one of the main reasons we launched BMA Communities was it was about the contract negotiation campaigns, because we did a survey of doctors and asked them whether they're interested in using communities as a way of talking to each other about some of the issues the profession's facing. And what we found is 2/3 of people saying, yeah, particularly contracts. They wanted to know what was going on in a process. So we launched a kind of engagement exercise where doctors were challenged with 5 questions, and we did this for juniors and consultants. And what we got was incredible. We got hundreds and hundreds of comments of people saying what was important to them, what the issues were for them about junior doctors' rotas, their working hours, about how consultants felt about clinical excellence awards. All these issues that are really, really, really important to people. And the BMA Communities is more than a talking shop. It's about actually taking this information. And we've got a research company that's going to look at all the content that we've got in the community space about contracts, and that will be fed into our contract negotiators. So they'll see what ordinary doctors are saying about a lot of these issues, and it acts as a kind of barometer for the BMA, so we don't go off on our own little tangent where the profession think very differently about things. So BMA Communities is a powerful tool, and I'd encourage you to check it out. You can just go to bma.org.uk /communities, and if you log in there, you can get involved in a lot of the conversations that are happening at ARM. So the final way in which I think is a really important way in which doctors can get involved in social media is through communicating with patients. And this is probably a slightly more controversial area, because I think there is a person I'm going to click up now that is quite divisive in terms of how he interacts on social media. So Christian Jensen here is talking about vitamins. So someone's asked him a very simple question: can you have too many vitamins? And he's giving a very simple answer: yes, it can be very toxic. And so he's making doctors really accessible to the public, and it's extending on his role as a kind of a media doctor, and he's able to interact with patients. And it breaks down the barriers between doctors and patients, and it's a really interesting area, and it's one I think Julian will touch upon when he talks about some of the risks of using social media. Similarly, we have Rosemary Leonard, another kind of celebrity doctor, so to speak, and a journalist. And she's, raising issues to do with, simple healthcare advice. And I think there's a really powerful aspect of people here that, doctors are experts. They know about health. And signposting quality health information to the public. And I think it's something Ben does as well in terms of his use of Twitter, signposting accurate, useful information to people that don't have the level of expertise that you have. And I think that's a really powerful thing that you can get involved with. So what I'm hoping for today is some of you have this I get it moment, which I call it, is when it kind of dawns on you what the use of social media is all about and actually a way in which you might like to use it. And I hope you're inspired by some of the speakers that we have later in the day. But before I finish, I just want to introduce Julian Sheether, who's up to talk next. Now, I don't want you all running amok with social media before you listen to Julian, because Julian's going to take you down a little peg or two and get you to consider some of the issues that you need to think about before using social media. So if you just give a little round of applause for Julian.
Thank you very much. At some point in most proceedings, a rather grey man comes on in a suit and tries to put a damper on things. I hope I'm not him. But what I really want to do is just to offer a few cautionary notes about how best to stay safe on social media. So I'm not trying to put a dampener on the proceedings. I think the RCGP have brought out some guidance fairly recently, and one of the things they say quite nicely in it is new media, old principles, or words to that effect. And I think it is important as a kind of starting point to say, look, what social media seem to do is to permit an enormous flow of data. But the ordinary duties that would have bound professionals before social media arrived still bind, still have purchase when you are using social media. The obvious one is a duty of confidentiality. The fact that data are going out on social media does not in any way affect that fundamental underlying professional obligation. What social media can do, though, is to make it far easier to get data out there, for people to access the data, and to make identifiable what would not hitherto have been readily or easily identifiable. So that's the first precautionary note, if you like. New media, but old principles. Similarly, the law of defamation does not change because of the medium you are using. And beware, we know still how draconian the penalties for defamation can be in the UK. So another cautionary note. But the other thing, the thing that really quite intrigues me, the thing that's much harder to grasp hold of, is what social media are doing for concepts of professionalism. Because as Gordon has mentioned, social media introduce a new kind of porousness. Professional boundaries between patients and doctors, professionalism rests on the trust that boundaries can develop, so that as patients disclose information to their doctors, they feel comfortable that that information is going to be treated with respect, that ordinary duties of confidentiality are going to apply. But social media can be seductive. It can invite people to share information. Conversations that would once have been had in a pub suddenly start to appear on social media. So there's a really interesting challenge, I think, which is what effect are social media having on the nature of the professional relationship? We know, for example, that the boundaries between what would hitherto have been kept private and people's public lives, their public personas, we know that they are loosening up. Our culture is seeing a much more confessional lean. People are putting information into public arenas that they would hitherto ordinarily have kept private. So there's a cultural change taking place. Social media are responding to that, but also, in some respects, they are driving that change. So how does a profession like medicine, that depends upon the trust, depends upon the ability to maintain boundaries, how are social media going to impact in that culture? A couple of slides. This is loosely based upon an inquiry that I took in the ethics department. So you have here a young doctor placing on her Facebook page a statement about one of her patients. She thought of it as a humorous comment, but a big question there: how many patients would feel comfortable about going to see their doctor knowing that a comment that on the face of it is not obviously identifiable, knowing that a comment is going to appear on one of the doctor's Facebook page? And we've had many examples of senior colleagues having access to the Facebook pages of junior colleagues and finding information like this, and the junior colleagues having some bother as a result. So here you have an example of a certain kind of porousness. And what kind of impact does that have on concepts of professionalism? Surely the majority of patients would not want to see this kind of information tweeted. Okay. Another interesting one, again, this question of porousness. Here you have clearly a very interested doctor looking at a very unusual condition and saying to his or her colleagues, look, isn't this fascinating? This is really interesting medical data. But this condition is quite unusual, and therefore the chances of identifiability necessarily increase. So around here cluster a number of questions. Is it acceptable, even though you feel that you have de-identified the source of this information, even though it's clinically very interesting, even though your colleagues would be excited to see it, there is of course a question around here. The patient may be able to identify themselves. People who know the patient, are aware of their condition, may be able to identify themselves. And of course, as we know, this kind of information, once it's out on social media, can really be, can go viral. So again, although we have clear principles around confidentiality, social media are beginning to unsettle them and leave people in doubt about whether or not they are in fact respecting ordinary duties. Okay, this one I quite like. Professionalism. What do we mean by professionalism? What kinds of behaviour, I realise this may be a very contentious question here, but what kinds of behaviour, do we expect of a doctor? And should a doctor, clearly enjoying her own private life very nicely, thank you very much, having a great time, should a doctor put images of herself in that way onto media that her patients may get access to? Now, in some respects, this can be described as a kind of rights issue. Doctors have rights to a private life. They have rights of expression. Why should they not exploit them? But we know that professionalism as a concept is more subtle than a kind of set of broad rights claims. But there is a question around here, I think. How many people, how many patients would like to see an image of their doctor in this way? What impact might that have on trust? How do doctors feel about their own professional colleagues? Now, I haven't got answers to those. As I say, it seems to me this is a moving feast. Professionalism, concepts of private and public, boundaries, they're all shifting. But you see here, I think it does raise a certain set of questions. Okay, the lying down game. Any of you remember this? So you had a number, these aren't obviously medical students, but some medical students posted images on Facebook, on social media, of them playing the lying down game on hospital premises. It did make me chortle when I saw it, but at the same time, these students were actually criticised by the hospitals for basically saying this is unprofessional behaviour. So you had another issue there. What constitutes professional behaviour in these contexts? And here you have another one. A junior doctor has been suspended after allegedly making explicit and insulting remarks about one of Britain's leading medical figures on a website message board. One of the things about social media is it can be very tempting to rant on them. Very tempting at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're exhausted, when you've had a few drinks too many, to just vent your spleen. Entirely understandable human response. But please be wary, because if you put it out on social media, one of your neighbourhood journalists might suddenly decide that it would be a very good idea to publish it. So, 5 simple rules I'll leave you with. This is about staying safe on social media. Don't use it when you're drunk, angry or emotional. Fair enough. Do not say anything on social media you would not be happy to see in a newspaper. Nice rule of thumb, that. If I'm going to put this up on social media, how would I feel if I saw it in a paper? Do not openly attack your employer without thinking about the repercussion. We've all been there, we've all been tempted. It's probably not a great idea. Act, a nice one, act in a professional and courteous manner, and make it clear when you're expressing private views that those views are your own. So finally, enjoy social media, but do take a little bit of care.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast. If you're interested in hearing more, there's been some lively debate as well as some funny and helpful tips about doctors using social media. You can find all of this in the Free-for-All group on BMA Communities at bma.org.uk/free-for-all.